Imagine a sound so unnatural it could shatter your mind on impact. Not because it was loud, but because in the half second after you heard it, every instinct in your body suddenly believed you had become prey. The Greeks had a name for that feeling. You use a version of it every single day, and you have almost no idea where it came from. He wasn't fully a man, and he wasn't fully a beast either. Cloven hooves planted in the dirt, horns curling out of a face that looked human right up until it didn't. The ancient world believed he lived in the empty places, the silent forests, the hollow caves, the exact spots where a normal person suddenly feels watched for no reason at all. He is the only god the Greeks ever claimed actually died. Before we get to how, we need to understand why something built like this was ever allowed anywhere near Olympus in the first place. Every other god on Olympus was built to be looked at. Zeus was carved from marble, muscled and golden. Apollo was the ideal of youth. Aphrodite was the ideal of beauty itself. The Greeks worshipped the human form because they believed it was the most perfect shape the universe could produce. Then there was Pan. His own mother took one look at the child she'd just delivered and fled the room. Not startled, repulsed. Some traditions say she screamed at the sight of him. Legs already ending in hooves, a forehead already sprouting the beginnings of horns. This wasn't a baby that looked unusual. This was a baby that violated every expectation of what a newborn should become. It was Hermes who found him abandoned and carried him up to Olympus, fully expecting the other gods to recoil. They didn't. They laughed, not cruelly, curiously, because this impossible creature entertained them by embodying something none of them fully controlled. The wilderness itself, in a body, standing in their throne room. And here's the part that should sit uncomfortably with you. Unlike Zeus, who ruled from a palace, or Hades, whose kingdom had gates and borders and rules, Pan belonged to no city and no law. His kingdom started exactly where the stone roads ended. Every rustling branch you can't identify, every silence that suddenly feels too quiet, that was his territory, and it still is. The Greeks didn't fear Pan because he looked like an animal. They feared him because he was a reminder. Underneath the marble statues, the temples, and the disciplined philosophy that Greek civilization prided itself on, something older and far less controlled was still very much alive, and it hadn't forgotten the way home. And that reminder didn't stay in the woods. It followed you home, into the 1 hour of the day you'd least expect to be afraid. And once you understand why, you'll never look at an empty field the same way again. If the Greeks wanted to imagine death, they looked underground. Hades was terrifying, but he was predictable. Every soul walked the same road, crossed the same rivers, faced the same judgment. Death, to the Greek mind, obeyed rules, and rules are survivable. Pan offered no such comfort. He struck without warning, with no priest able to bargain, and no sacrifice able to guarantee safety. His territory was Arcadia, the rugged interior of Greece, where dense forests swallowed the light and jagged mountains cut travelers off from each other for days at a time. And the hour shepherds feared most wasn't midnight, it was noon. When the sun sat directly overhead, shadows vanished, and the birdsong simply stopped. Not because anything had happened, because something was about to. That waiting silence became his greatest weapon. When it finally broke, the fear that followed hit with a force no blade could match. And the Greeks gave that collapse a name that has outlived every temple built for the god who caused it. Panic. Historians recorded it as an actual battle tactic. Greek forces flooding an enemy camp at night with unexplainable noise until soldiers who had never once broken formation against another army abandoned their shields and ran from a sound with no visible source. At the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians credited their impossible victory to exactly this: a terror sent by Pan, tearing through the Persian ranks faster than any spear could. Think about what that means. A scream from an empty tree line was considered more dangerous than 10,000 armed men, because you can fight a man. You cannot fight a sound that has no shape and no mercy. The greatest lie ever told about Pan is that he was harmless, a playful musician, a cheerful guardian who spent his afternoons chasing melodies through the hills. That version of him existed, but only when he wanted you to believe it did. Beneath the laughter lived something far older and far hungrier. The Greeks understood that every human being carries two selves, the one that greets strangers with kindness and the one that emerges when survival becomes the only law left. Pan was that second self, given a body. He wasn't evil in the way the Greeks understood evil. He was instinct with the conscience stripped out of it. When hunger came, he hunted. When desire came, he pursued. He never apologized, because nature never does. A wolf doesn't ask permission before it kills, and a storm doesn't regret the village it destroys. The wilderness isn't cruel to you. It's simply indifferent to whether you survive it. Pan carried that same indifference, and that made him more frightening than monsters with actual rules. Medusa could turn you to stone, but she stayed in one place. The Minotaur waited inside a maze you had to choose to enter. Even the Furies only punished the guilty. Pan required none of that. He required no crime, no invitation, no prophecy, only isolation. The shepherd separated from his flock, the traveler who wandered off the marked road. Be alone in the wrong place long enough, and you had already entered his kingdom, whether you meant to or not. The Greek myths are full of people who stumbled out of his forests, having lost something that never fully came back: their nerve, their memory, sometimes their grip on what was real. And that points to something more unsettling than the god himself. The Greeks weren't only afraid of meeting Pan in the woods, they were afraid of recognizing him, because their entire civilization was built on the belief that humanity had risen above the animal kingdom. Pan existed to ask one devastating question: what if it never actually left? And then, according to the old sources, silence. A different kind than the one at noon, a permanent one. The historian Plutarch recorded a strange story: a ship sailing near the Greek coast, a voice calling out across open water, ordering the helmsman to announce to the shore that the great god Pan was dead. When he did, the cry that answered back wasn't celebration, it was grief, vast enough to seem like it was coming from the land itself. Pan is the only god the ancient world ever claimed had actually died. Zeus faded as belief moved on. Apollo faded the same way, but Pan was allowed to end, maybe because that's the only way a god like that can end. Not defeated, not destroyed, simply no longer needed, once the wild world had been mapped, logged, and tamed by the civilization that used to fear it. So here's the question that should be sitting with you right now. If Pan really did die the moment the wilderness lost its mystery, why does an empty forest at dusk still make your skin crawl?